everyone. So today we're going to be looking at some of my reading statistics from the last year. So I did this video last year and people really enjoyed it, I think, from the comments. So I decided to do it again. So I'm going to include like bar graphs and pie charts and stuff. And I got these all from my spreadsheet. I did not create the spreadsheet though. I will leave the link to the original creator down below. I did modify it just barely just to make it more usable for manga because the original one is more focused on books, which is fine. I just, like for demographics, I changed them all to manga demographics instead of like young adult and middle grade, stuff like that. I really love the spreadsheet though. So if that sounds interesting to you, please check out the creator of the spreadsheet. It's really cool. I've used it for 3 years now. So yeah, I'm also going to be talking about some of the goals I had this year and if I accomplished them or not. So let's go ahead and get started. Firstly, my most important stat for me is how many unread manga I have on my shelves at any time. So this shows how many manga I own, how many manga that I have read, and how many I have unread. So this has largely not changed in the past year, which I'm totally okay with. I was going to try to get the number unread to below 200, but 224 is not that bad. I think last year it was 234 or 214, something like that. It was around that number. I believe my percentage read has gone up about 1%. So really, these stats have not changed, but I'm not mad about that. I'm not buying a ton of manga and then leaving it on my shelf forever. I'm reading the stuff that comes in, so it's perfectly fine with me. So now let's look at which months were the best for my reading. So here we have all the manga, like each month and how many volumes or books I read in that month. So yeah, you can see February, not very good, especially in between January and March. February was not a good reading month. And then towards the end of the year, you can see that number get lower. So November was also not a good reading month, but that's just because I was focusing on novels. When I'm filming this, I still have about a week or so left to read more manga. I do think this December number will go up. I'm planning on finishing Full Metal Alchemist and maybe squeezing in another volume or two. So just in terms of numbers, I believe November will end up being my worst reading month. For the entire year, my average rating was 3.6, which I'm pretty sure is the same average rating I've had the entire time I've been tracking my reading. 3.6 has always been my average rating. But if we look closer, we can see my average rating for each month. So my best reading month in terms of rating was June, actually, and I don't really know why. I feel like it would have been October, but I read Battle Royale and that really pulled the average rating down. So June ended up being fine, which is kind of funny because after June, when I started focusing on the TBR wheel, that is when things really fell apart and my average rating went down really fast. But June was good, so that's great. And then my worst reading month was February. So I did read some 5 stars though, which is great, but just average rating is a 3.3. So that's not that great when most of the things you read are 3 stars. Don't really want that. 3 stars are fine. They're not 1 stars. It's just not what I would like my reading to be. I did read some of my favorite things of the entire year in February though, so it's okay. It all balances out. If we look at the numbers for the entire year, I so far have read 401 books. Like I said, I have a couple days left to read some more, so I'm guessing this number is going to be about 410 by the end of the year. My reading goal was 400, so I hit that perfectly. My pages read, again, this number is going to be above 100,000, which is less than it has been for the past 3 years, I want to say. Definitely the past 2 years, but I think the past 3 years. But I will talk about why that is the case in a minute. Then I listened to some audiobooks that you can see, and I reread 55 things, mostly manga. Yeah, I think only manga, no books. Next up, let's look at one of my favorite things is the genres I read, because I think I have favorite genres, and then every year I look at this and it ends up being pretty different from what I expect. So my number 1 read genre this year was fantasy. I want to say last year was also fantasy, so that kind of makes sense. I read a lot of fantasy books. I can't really think of that many fantasy manga that I read. I did reread The Witch and the Beast. That's only 10 volumes. Yeah, I don't really know. I guess it just added up to 81 volumes. It's number 1 by quite a bit. Number 2 is historical. And I know I read Golden Kamuy, which I categorized as historical, but I don't know where these other volumes are coming from that are historical. I'd have to think about it for a while. But I do know that last year my number 2 most read genre was contemporary / slice of life, which is number 3 this year. And this is just anything that takes place in the real world that doesn't have another genre like thriller or something like that. So yeah, this is kind of a broad genre. Next up, we have sci-fi and horror. I am surprised that sci-fi is higher than horror, obviously only by one book, but there aren't that many horror series in existence in terms of manga, but I do pick up as many as I can. So I also had an entire month where I focused on reading horror manga. So yeah, sci-fi is another one of my favorite genres, so it's not really surprising to me that this one is that high either. So yeah, these are my general stats for genres. Let's look at demographics now. I wish I had the numbers for last year to compare them, but this year I read 164 seinen manga. That's not surprising to me. The genres I enjoy tend to be categorized under seinen manga, published in seinen magazines, so that's what I end up reading. I also read 95 volumes of shonen manga, and josei and shoujo were pretty close. I think last year I had more shoujo than josei. I might be wrong about that though. So yeah, these numbers look pretty correct. There's nothing here that stands out to me really. Next up, we will look at the number of manga I read versus novels versus novellas. So of course, obviously I read a lot of manga. I read 335 volumes of manga. And if you will recall, my original goal at the beginning of the year that I set was to read 2 novels every month. So that would be a total of 24 novels. Halfway through the year, I realized I was going to do a lot better than that. So I changed it to 52 novels. So I'm going to count novellas and novels like the same. So 63 novels / novellas is what I read in 2024. So that's really good. That is what I wanted to do. I wanted to get back to reading novels. The last 2 years, since I was so focused on lowering my TBR of manga, I kind of pushed novels to the wayside, but I've always been someone who reads novels. I've read novels since I was a kid, and I've read a lot of novels. This channel used to be focused on novels, and then I talked about manga, and now I only talk about manga, but I do love reading novels, and I've had such a great year getting back into those, so I'm really happy I was able to focus on those a lot. Now we can look at publishers. So I don't know why this is interesting to me, but it is. I like to see which publishers are most present in my reading. So this year it was Kodansha, and I can't remember if that was the case last year. I really should have looked at the stats from last year before doing this video. But number 1 was Kodansha, followed very closely by Viz. So that makes sense. Viz makes sense. Kodansha publishes a lot of manga, so Kodansha makes sense as well. And those two are far and away the most read publishers for me. Then next, we have Yen Press at only 34 volumes, Seven Seas at 25, and Tokyo Pop at 24. A lot of those were Battle Royale. So yeah, nothing really surprising here. I do think next year I'm going to combine Vertical and Kodansha, even if I'm reading a volume that was published before they were combined, just because it makes more sense to me. So if I had done that, obviously I only read 9 volumes that I considered strictly Vertical, but at this point I would consider them Kodansha as well. So nothing surprising here, but interesting to me nonetheless. And lastly, for the stats, I think we'll look at something just a little bit silly. So this reading tracker also tracks the color of the cover of the book you read, and it has a pie chart for it. So these are my most read colors on covers. So number 1 is black. I'm not surprised by that. I read a lot of horror manga. Those volumes often tend to have black covers. Next up is blue. And I feel like this was the same last year. Actually, last year I had a lot of green. So I don't know why so many covers have blue on them, but that's interesting as well. Then we have white and red and green and yellow. This literally doesn't mean anything, but I do like looking at this pie chart, so I thought I would show you as well. Now let's look at some of the goals that I originally set for myself at the beginning of the year and see if I've accomplished them. So my general goals, obviously my reading goal was to read 400. I know some people don't like reading goals and don't set them. I love reading goals. It doesn't really stress me out. It just makes me challenge myself, and I love to challenge myself, as you probably know if you've watched any of my videos before. So I accomplished this reading goal. I am probably going to lower it for next year, but you will have to wait to hear that when I make my 2025 reading goals video. My other reading goals were to read all my completed manga, and I did not do that, but I'm okay with that. I do like having a little bit of a TBR just so I have choices, and so I'm not feeling like I'm forced to read some things that are incomplete on my shelves, because I really don't like doing that. So I know I have lots of one-shots left on my TBR. I know I have a lot of Osamu Tezuka works left on my TBR. You saw my unread number earlier. Not all of those are completed manga, but I did want to originally read all my completed manga. I'm not sure I want to do that anymore. So I'm fine not having accomplished that goal. Obviously, next we have read 2 novels per month, which I later changed to read 52 novels down at the bottom there. And I did that. So really great. I'm really happy with that. That was the goal I was most hoping to complete or trying to accomplish. And then my other goal was to reread 6 series, and I'd picked out 6 series I wanted to reread. I did not reread any of those. I don't really know what happened except for, again, I was focusing more on novels. So I'm actually okay with not having reread the series I wanted to. Some of them I've read not that long ago, so I didn't really need to reread it this soon. I do want to reread stuff, and obviously all these things that are on my shelves I have because I do plan on rereading them in the future, but if I instead focused on novels, I'm perfectly okay with not having reread the 6 series that I did set out to. And lastly, we'll look at the 10 series that I said I needed to read in 2024 and see if I read them. So at the top, we have Golden Kamuy. I did read that. I loved it. Most of that was a reread, but I ended up finishing the series in January. Had a fantastic time. One of my favorite series that I read this year. That will also be in another video. Next was Children of the Whales. So this one I crossed off as completed, but I ended up dropping it and selling off my set because I don't know why. I had read this or started reading it in 2018. I enjoyed it, but this year when I came back to it, I had issues with it that might have been like surface level, but I was so distracted by them that I decided I wasn't gonna read anymore. So yeah, I marked it as completed, but I didn't actually read it. But if I took it off my TBR, I'm counting it. Next up, we have Alice in Borderland, another one I knew I was going to read this year, so I put it on the list. And I did read it, and I enjoyed it. Another one that I might talk about later in another video. Then I read Orange. This one I enjoyed, but I didn't love, so I unhauled that one. Next, we have our first one that I did not read. So this was Barefoot Gen. And this is a very, very heavy historical World War II manga about the atomic bombs. So I felt like I needed to be in the right headspace, and I was kind of saving it for the end of the year, but then I decided to read other things at the end of the year. So I did not get to this, but I do own all of it. I do plan on reading it. I just want to give it its time. I don't want to rush it. I want to give it the respect that it deserves. So I'm okay having not finished it this year. I do plan on reading it next year, hopefully. The Heroic Legend of Arslan, I decided I was going to catch back up to this manga this year. I did earlier this year, and I really enjoyed it. At this point, I think there's 2 volumes now that I haven't read, but I'm fine waiting for those. By the author of Full Metal Alchemist, which is next on the list. So right now, I did not cross this off because I haven't finished it as of filming this, but I'm 100% going to finish this before the end of the year. So we can mark this one as finished as well. Next up is Thermae Rome. This is the giant one-shot volume that I have. I read this during the one-shot readathon, really enjoyed it, happy to have read it. And then we have some other things that I kind of just filled out on the sheet. So we have Tsugami Bachi, which is right now out of print. It's only on the Shonen Jump app, and I've just been interested in this manga for a long time. I want to read it, but I think because I forced myself to read those digital manga in the middle of the year and I hated them, I didn't end up going back to this because I was afraid that I wouldn't like it. So I do plan on reading this manga eventually, but because it's on the Shonen Jump app, I kind of don't feel any rush to at the moment. Then I said I was going to read Basara or Red River, and I didn't read either of them. I did buy the first volume of Red River. I plan on reading it next year, but I did not read either of these this year, so I failed that challenge. And next up is Baccano. So I have all however many light novels are out. I want to say 22, and I'm happy to say I read 1 volume of Baccano that I literally finished last night. So at this point, I've read 2 volumes of Baccano in 2 years. So is that a success? No, but I am making progress. And now that they are releasing audiobooks for this series, it is a lot easier for me to just go ahead and listen to it while I'm making dinner or something like that. So yeah, I don't know why I end up pushing off all my light novels when I'm reading regular novels all the time now. I don't know what it is, but I did neglect Baccano again this year. Hopefully that is rectified next year. So yeah, those were all my stats for the year. As I hinted a couple times, I will be doing a best and worst video for all the manga I read this year. If you have any thoughts about these stats or anything like that, please leave your comments down below. But that's gonna be it for this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.